Thank you for watching this on-demand webinar, Engage Customers Where They Live, Customer Messaging in Conversational Commerce. This session is produced by Aberdeen Strategy and Research, a part of Spiceworks Civ Davis, and sponsored by Infobip and Adobe. Our speakers today are Arun Kumar, Senior Director, Strategic Alliances and Partnerships at Infobip, Omar Mankara, VP and Principal Analyst at Aberdeen, and Tori Brunker, Senior Director of Product Marketing at Adobe. I'll hand it over to Omer to get started.
All right, great. Welcome, everyone. And once again, we're very excited to be bringing this event to you, where we're going to talk about all things conversational commerce and customer messaging in commerce programs. And once again, we have a great agenda packed with great insights. And both Tori and Arun, I'm very much looking forward to our conversation together with you. Now, as we go through our journey, we're going to have a couple different stops along our way. Our first stop is going to be taking a look at the role of messaging in modern commerce programs. So we're going to talk about the evolution of messaging, why it's important for the modern commerce organizations. Then we're going to talk about some interesting stats on the ROI, the return on investing of customer messaging. Then we're going to change gears a little bit and talk about the building blocks, how our best-in-class businesses, best-in-class commerce businesses, building and nurturing a top-notch customer messaging program. And along the way, I know we're going to hear great insights, both from Tori and Arun, about real-life success stories on how brands are already using customer messaging in e-commerce activities. And towards the end, we're going to have a Q&A session, so please stay tuned, as I'm sure there'll be great questions coming from you all that we're looking forward to answering. So, a couple additional housekeeping items before we really get down into some of the research findings is all about the research that we're about to bring to you. Again, we're very excited about this event, and there's a lot of research that led into putting this presentation together. So specifically, we surveyed more than 850 businesses around the globe, companies in different industries and different sizes. And within that particular survey sample pool, over half of the businesses had e-commerce activities, so really sizable sample pool. What we did here was drill down into those businesses that have e-commerce activities and take a look at how messaging in particular makes a difference when businesses are using e-commerce. So again, we're going to talk a lot about all that. So speaking of messaging and how that unlocks business growth, here's what we learned from our research. When businesses are incorporating messaging, and we'll talk about what messaging stands in alignment with conversational commerce, they're seeing some significant benefits versus businesses that are not using messaging in commerce. Specifically, from top to bottom, messaging users as businesses are seeing 77% annual increase in customer satisfaction. So for all of you that are interested in creating happier customers, and I'm sure that's pretty much everyone in our audience today, that's a big takeaway, right? So we'll talk about why and how messaging is able to lead to that result. But there's also financial benefits. We're seeing messaging users as businesses, it is e-commerce organizations, drive significant revenue growth, 60% greater annual revenue growth versus non-messaging users. Likewise, more than twice the annual improvement that is decrease in service cost and improving in marketing excellence. So goal from today's webinar is to help you, our audience members, accomplish similar, if not better results within your businesses. So our key last housekeeping item as key learnings here is just a quick summary of what we're about to share with you before we double click on each and every one of them. So first and foremost, we'll see that customer messaging today has really become essential for e-commerce programs, and we'll see why. We're also going to see how messaging users are able to enjoy superior revenue growth, as we've seen in the previous slide, happier customers and lower costs. And then we'll double click into the building blocks where we're going to touch on connective use of customer data and how to use that data in conjunction with analytics, AI, and automation to drive intelligent conversational commerce. So with that, let's get right into it and let's talk a little bit about the role of messaging in modern commerce programs. So let's talk about the evolution. We're going to take a look at two different sides of the relationship. We're going to talk about the business, the e-commerce organizations, and we're going to talk about the consumers that those businesses are servicing, and we'll see their mutual channel adoption and preferences. So on this particular slide, we're taking a look at the business side. So recently, again, one of the questions that we've asked within the survey that we've conducted was what channels are businesses using and what channels are they planning to use? So the purple bars here are indicative of current adoption of channels, and the teal bars are indicative of planned adoption. So overall, if you zoom out a little bit, you're seeing that 1 out of 2 businesses, 50% of firms are using at least 10 different channels. Those channels vary from company to company, but that's a big takeaway. One of the areas that I really wanted to highlight for our audience is the role of messaging. So as you can see next to the red arrows here, uh, businesses are telling us that text messaging, third-party messaging apps like WhatsApp, in-app messaging, those are either really high in adoption or also really high in planned adoption. So those are very much priorities for businesses. And it is for a good reason. Companies are not just waking up one morning, business leaders are not just waking up one morning saying, oh, it would be nice to have more messaging in our e-commerce activities. That's just not the case. They're doing, the current, we're seeing the current and planned adoption of messaging the way it is because consumers are demanding that. So here's a quick look at what the consumer preferences are from a different survey. In this case, we surveyed more than 840 consumers, again, around the globe, but also different age groups. So we looked at different age groups and how they prefer to interact with businesses. As you may have suspected, the number one channel for boomers and partly Gen X has been more so phone to interact with businesses to make purchases or request support. But if you look at millennials and Gen Z, messaging, text messaging, WhatsApp, and social messaging apps. Those are ranking really highly for Gen Z in particular, number one preferred channel. So for e-commerce organizations that are looking to serve and expand their footprint across Gen Z and millennials that really make up a good chunk of today's buying power, that's why businesses are looking to incorporate and already incorporating messaging because those are what the consumers are preferring. So, Tori and Arun, I want to get you guys' perspectives. I know there's some interesting research, and I'd love to see what you guys are seeing out there. Starting off with you, Tori, what trends are you observing that's driving such rapid adoption of messaging by brands in e-commerce?
I think the biggest trend we're seeing relates to personalized experiences and just delivering those across every touch point throughout the customer buying journey. We actually recently released a consumer buying study tied specifically to the summer sales cycle, like Prime Day, for example. And 67% of our respondents said that they would actually like to receive personalized messages, content, or offers while they're on their shopping journey. Previously, I think we all thought that that was very detrimental to the shopping journey. Today, it's expected, and those are expected to be personalized and contextually aware of what I'm doing in that journey, whether it's in store or online. We also saw the same thing that you did related to millennials and Gen Z. They are very heavily tied to SMS messaging and third party messaging apps versus some of the more traditional methods that we usually use for personalization, like email. So, really excited to see this trend continue to take off. And I certainly think that it is a pillar in delivering those personalized experiences that our consumers expect and are rewarding us with great results uh, as they get them.
No, thanks for that, Tori. And I agree. We've actually done some additional research with, privacy and personalization, and there definitely seems to be an expectation across, especially the millennials and Gen Z, where, they do understand that in exchange for giving more information about themselves, they value that sort of personalization component. So that's definitely big. And everyone, I'd love to get your take also. What trends are you observing that's driving such rapid adoption of messaging with the businesses that you're speaking with?
Sure. Thanks, Omar. So essentially, I think I'm not going to go into the data elements which you two touched upon, right? The quantitative side. Um, I think from the trends really stem from how we operate as human beings, right? So at the left-hand side of the slide, uh, at the end of the day, we humans are social beings. We really crave for interactions with people, right? That's how we operate. So that's what is reflected in the left side of the slide, where these third-party chat apps, let's call it an SMS kind of channels, give you the opportunity and avenue to interact with the brand that you're engaging with, right? So that's what is evident in the millennial and Gen Zs of the world, right? Increasingly, and even people like us, which I'm not part of the millennial Gen Z, even I'm getting on that bandwagon personally and interacting the same way. So on the moving to the right slide, right? We again, humans are creatures of habit, right? We just stick to something that is inertia to change. Now, and combine that with consumerization of IT that has been on for more than a decade. That's what is reflected in the right side. Hey, I am used to doing something certain way, which is, let's say, using all these apps or my mobile phone as a device. Now, I want to not get out of that real estate, still conduct everything that I want to do with a brand, all the way from discovery of whatever I want to purchase to purchasing and getting the product in hand. That is what is reflected, and increasingly so, as market studies suggest, it's a huge marketplace that we can best serve the end customers as brands, and in the process benefit ourselves for companies like Adobe and Infobip. So I'll turn it back to you, Omar.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for those insights, Arun. So, moving on, we talked about the role that messaging is playing for conversational commerce, why it's become more popular. A couple more interesting takeaways from our consumer survey. So, we've talked about the consumer channel preferences. We heard from Tori and Arun about their mutual takes. So, one of the other questions that we asked in our study was um, what are consumer preferences when it comes to interacting with a human being versus a bot? So, as again, one may have expected, boomers and partly Gen X are more likely to prefer human assistance, although even Gen Z, two-thirds are saying that for certain kinds of issues, they still value the ability to interact with a human being. And with Gen Z, there's also more propensity for preferring bots, IVAs, chatbots and IVAs to manage the e-commerce activities themselves. So the beauty of messaging that we'll touch on the next slide when we define conversational commerce is the ability to address those two opposite angles. One, you can have agents who can manage text messaging, who can have third-party messaging app-based conversations with consumers, but also you can build IVAs and chatbots with workflows to be able to have consumers self-serve themselves. So you're really able to address on both sides. So when we talk about conversational commerce, I really want to provide a brief definition here for our audience members because it's important as we go through the conversation today to uh, define what we mean. So we talked about messaging in the context of text messaging, third-party messaging apps like a WhatsApp, for example, where businesses are using those channels to engage customers for the purposes of various things. It could be order updates. Arun may have ordered an item and he's getting an update. And Tori may be interested in the status for a service request, as far as a wrong billing, for example. Or I may be interested in reminders for items that I forgot that I added in my shopping cart, but I really value that personal touch. So various ways to deploy conversational commerce, but it's all about using the text messaging and WhatsApp and other third-party messaging apps for similar purposes. And our research already tells us that two-thirds of e-commerce organizations are leveraging that. So two-thirds of businesses are already using text messaging and third-party messaging apps. So this is not new. If your business is not already using that, then chances are you should think about using that because your competition is already doing that and they're seeing the results that we're going to touch on in a minute. Well, before we do that, Arun, another question to you. I'm curious to see what do you often observe as the reasons why brands haven't yet embarked on conversational commerce? If we're seeing a third of businesses not having transitioned yet. So I'm curious to see what are some of the reasons why you see be that the case.
Yeah, I think it's twofold, Omar, in my opinion. Number one is what I would like to call the need for a CX mind shift, right? Today, more so, the customer experience is being viewed through the lens that you see on the left side of the slide, right? The key thing that I want to call out is it is still fragmented across channel, i.e., multi-channel, but not omni-channel, right? That is one. Second is largely the communications that are being done between brands and customers are one way, right? Whether it's blast email or a blast SMS message promoting something, things of that nature, right? And the third and most critical important thing is, it is more content driven, as I alluded to in the first two things, and more so there is no continuous history or memory of what has transpired between a brand and a customer in the past. So it's not a unified customer journey as they progress through interactions with the brand. Now, so where should we go to? What's the mind shift need required for brands is on the right. What we would like to say, total experience. So have the customer at the center, the conversation at the center, right? Try to get a holistic view, continuously enhanced view, 360-degree view of the customer as they progress through the journey, so that you can personalize accordingly based on their need, whether it's explicit or latent, right? Needs that they have. And more important, bringing this omni-channel together, they should be able to seamlessly move from one channel to another and have a history or memory of what has transpired in the past, so that you can weave the most resonant message, if you will, that can progress them through the journey. So that is one. Now, the second element is, all this is great conceptually. Now, are the vendors like Infobip and Adobe really enabling the brands to accomplish this, right? The support from the vendor ecosystem. And simply put, we as Infobip were trying to do that with e-commerce platforms such as Adobe Commerce. So the order related events are being fed into our omni-channel communication platform, so that it enables brands to have an integrated messaging approach, if you will, to the end customers beyond just their web and mobile properties, the various channels that we are talking about in the context of conversational commerce. And at the bottom, again, get an understanding of who the end customer is, how are they behaving with the brand throughout the journey, and then leverage that into our the Infobip people as kind of lightweight CDP kind of module, and use our SaaS solutions to engage with them all the way from discovery to conversion to post conversion customers support and service and things of that nature. So if we as vendors can provide that ecosystem, then certainly brands would be more receptive to progress further on their conversational commerce journey. So that said, I'll back to you, Omar.
Oh, thank you, Arun. That's a great insight. So, for our audience members, this was our first stop. So, we just talked about the role of messaging in commerce. We talked about why it's rising, talked about millennials, Gen Z, even boomers and Gen X being open to certain use cases for them. So, with that as the background, let's talk a little bit about the ROI of customer messaging. Now we know that two-thirds of businesses are already using conversational commerce. And let's dive a little bit deeper into the results that they're seeing versus businesses that are not using conversational commerce. So we're going to have two separate colors here. The way to read this chart is the purple bars, the dark purple bars are companies with conversational commerce. The ones in red are the ones without. We're going to take a look at the year-over-year change in performance. So in this case, on the left, next to the red arrow, we're seeing that conversational commerce users, the businesses with conversational commerce, are seeing an 11.6% annual improvement in response time to customer requests. And that is a decrease because anytime you lengthen the customer request, response time to customer requests, that's actually worsening. So when businesses are using text messaging, third-party messaging apps, what they're telling us is that they're actually seeing almost 3 times the amount of shrinkage in response time to customer requests. So they're responding to customer needs faster because the customers don't have to dial in and go through an IVR menu and explain their issue. It's just a lot more efficient, a lot more effortless. Speaking of effort, that's also exactly what our data told us, that those businesses are improving customer effort scores by almost 90% more. Again, a decrease in effort. And that should be always top of mind for e-commerce organizations in particular, because the more convenient it is for customers to buy and receive support, hence the more effortless it is, the more likely those customers are to stick around and be happy. In fact, again, that's what the data tells us. Those customers are happier with CSAT rates, customer satisfaction rates improving almost 80% more versus non-users of conversational commerce. And again, happier customers tend to retain their business more widely, which is corroborated here. And ultimately, they tend to share their positive word of mouth through relevant channels that apply to the business. So really elevates the brand's awareness and brand equity. A couple additional perspectives here is that conversational commerce is not just a tool for customer engagement. It also is a tool to help drive better financial outcomes. So in this case, next to the red arrow, you're seeing conversational commerce users as firms are seeing 9.3% annual increase in revenue versus 5.8, so almost a 60% gap in between. Why is that? Again, the ability to drive more personalized engagements. We heard from Tori that the research that they've also conducted was highlighting that personalization is number one priority. That's what buyers are expecting. And with conversational commerce being the case, that's what's driving the growth. Another outcome here is ROMI, return on marketing investments, in this case defined as marketing's contribution to company revenue. So in this case, marketers are now able to drive better engagement and re-engagement. So I mentioned early on, for example, I may have items in the shopping cart, and the business now can build marketing flows where the item could be popped up as a reminder, as a text message, or different forms of engagement to pull me back in to make me buy that item. So again, makes it a lot more seamless for the buyers to be able to purchase products. On the flip side, we talked about revenue. On the cost side, same story holds true. So by making it easier for Arun, Tori, Omar, or any consumer to be able to not just purchase products more easily through messaging and third-party messaging, but also request support, businesses are able to cut down costs. So we don't have to call in, driving up to telephony costs for the business and also agent labor costs. It's a lot more efficient to build automated workflows to provide agents with next best action items that we'll talk about. So those are, again, some of the other results that businesses are seeing when they implement conversational commerce. Better revenue, reduction in cost, which all ties into an improvement in profit margins for businesses, which I know is priority for many of our audience members today. So with that being the case, Tori, I'm curious to see, how do these findings map to your observations out there with the brands that you're speaking with and results they're seeing by using conversational commerce?
Hi, yes, they actually map very well. Our Adobe Commerce customers have seen upwards of 10x improvement in their conversion rates, 8x improvements in revenue per visitor, and 9x improvement in average order value when they implement even some of the most basic personalized experiences across all of their channels. And then finally, they also are seeing a pretty large improvement in terms of return shoppers and buyers. And these statistics actually hold true both for our brands selling to consumers as well as our brands selling to businesses. So personalization really is for everyone, and certainly, leveraging that along with these great conversational commerce instances are going to be critical for businesses to compete and thrive in today's markets.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And Arun, same question goes out to you. I'm curious to see what both Tori and you are observing. So what are you seeing out there as far as, what brands are able to accomplish when they're building conversational commerce?
Sure, Omar. So actually, I wanted to highlight this specific success story that we had with a client in MENA region, and I'm glad I used this primarily because it centers on customer satisfaction, which you alluded to, Omar, in your previous slide. The moment there is a happy customer, a satisfied customer, they're going to come back to the brand and purchase more and more, and thereby we increase the customer lifetime value, and they're going to bring about more customers through word of mouth referrals and things like that you talked about. So a few things is number one, I want to call out here. I'm not going to go into the details of the customer. Essentially, it's an e-commerce leading platform in Middle East and North Africa region. Uh, they had certain issues. They were effectively using SMS as one of the avenues for engaging with the customers. But given the reliability of that as a service in that particular region, occasionally, they also leveraged WhatsApp. So I want to call out the fact that it's an omni-channel use. They were able to move seamlessly from one channel to another as required by accommodating all the things that they would want to do with a customer, all the way from onboarding the customer, verifying that they are who they are, right, that they claim to, and then seamlessly enabling password resets and things of that nature, any service related stuff, all the way through connecting to automated and live agent interactions, right, seamlessly across both those channels. That is one. The second thing is that region is heavy on peer to peer between say Omar and Arun or Arun and Tori using WhatsApp effectively. So it goes back to what we talked about, we being creatures of habit and then carrying it over to our interactions with the brands. So leveraging the WhatsApp as a channel that the customers really use and trust on an everyday basis for business to customer interactions as well. So thereby they amplified their customer satisfaction score to 82%, as you can see, and all the corollary effect of various data that I have presented in terms of reduction in cost that you talked to Omar, as well as satisfied customer bringing more revenue, and thereby the margins increased for that customer as well. So with that said, Omar, I'll turn it back to you.
Perfect. Thank you again, Arun. And I think you touched on something that's really important, that is knowing your customers, right? So how they communicate, how they prefer to interact with businesses, with their habits. So that's going to be a part of our emphasis as we go through our last stop here and talk about the best practices to build and nurture a top-notch customer messaging program. So far, again, we touched on the role of messaging. Then we talked about the ROI. Now we're going to talk about the building blocks. How do you actually build and nurture a top-notch messaging slash conversational commerce program? So it all starts with, again, knowing who your customers are. So for that, you have to have a connected view of customer data. So some of the ways that companies in dark purple are able to build that, again, same color scheme, conversational commerce users that are businesses, 91% adoption for standardizing customer data across the business versus 78% adoption. So a bit of a gap there. So what that stands for is that across different regions, across different departments, they're standardizing the way they collect and manage customer data. So it makes it a whole lot easier to have a unified customer profile across whichever department, whichever channel, so they can personalize the experiences. And again, that unified profile for customer data is essentially what we're talking about as a connected view of data across all systems and channels. So it's not just enough to connect data from text messaging and third-party messaging apps. They have to be connected across all the other interaction channels. In person, if it exists, web, video, mobile, whichever are the engagement channels involved, email, for example, they all have to be connected for a seamless view of customer data. And another challenge here that we're seeing employees in e-commerce organizations face is not knowing where the data is, not knowing what's the right data, hence data quality. So one of the ways that businesses are able to alleviate that problem is using AI tools, artificial intelligence tools, to provide real-time decision assist. So if an employee is looking for data when they're having a messaging interaction with a customer, a recommendation can pop up right on their desktop on where that information may be, or what product that the customer ordered, what is the delivery status, so they can immediately provide the customer with the right insight. So with that, Arun, another question to you. I'm curious to see, the disparate data problem has been a problem for many e-commerce organizations for some time now. So data across different systems being siloed. What are some of the ways that you're seeing businesses are solving for that problem?
Yeah, that's a great question, Omar. So first of all, I want for the audience benefit to bring about the context here, right? We are talking about omni-channel conversational commerce in the context of an end-to-end customer journey, right? So personally, when I think about disparate data, I think of three silos, right? One is the data silo, which is say across point of sale systems or CRM or ERP or whatever the case might be, the different data silos within an enterprise. The second is data silo in the context of functions, what I would like to say functional silos, right? How are we going to bridge the gap across marketing, sales, and customer service support, right? The third is channel silos, data in the context of channels, the engagement channels, right? Whether it's voice, whether it's the channels that we're talking about in terms of SMS and third-party chat apps. So when we say disparate data, I would want to call out for audience benefit, there are three different silos: data, functional, and channel silos that we have to account for. So bringing together all these data sources from these three perspectives, the obvious answer, as some of us would know, is having a customer data platform, right? By that, it need not necessarily be a single huge monolithic source of data, but at least there should be a way to tap into single source of truth, if you will. And that single source of truth in the form of, let's call it a CDP, should be continuously enriched based on any engagement that you have with a customer at any point in the journey, as well as on any channel. So how do we make it 360-degree continuous enriched single source of truth is the key thing that any brand has to think about. And between Infobip and Adobe, we obviously have ways to enable that. So with that said, I'll turn it to Tori, possibly, who might have additional viewpoint on this.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Arun. As you both mentioned, data is absolutely key to driving rich conversational experiences, or more broadly, what we call personalized commerce. And as Arun mentioned, having a customer data platform is critical. At Adobe, we believe being able to actually use a unified real-time customer profile across all of your channels is what's going to give you the required data at the right time to the right place to actually meet those growing customer expectations, and see some of the results that we talked about earlier. It's very critical that brands and businesses really think about how all of these pieces work together. And as Arun alluded to, you can start small. You can start with those AI-enabled features and activities, and really grow into that more real-time personalized experience as you're able to add that infrastructure, that data access, and all of the right mechanisms and operational efficiencies internally to be able to execute something at that high of a level at scale.
Arun and Tori, thanks for that perspective, for building that connective view of data. Now, once you really know who your customers are through that connective view of data, then comes engaging them through the methods that they prefer. That's where personalization again kicks in. So, quick commentary there. Within the consumer survey that we've conducted, one of the questions we've asked was, how many interactions do consumers tolerate where their expectations, whether it be channel, whether it be personalization, are not met? And that seems to be 3 interactions. So um, the takeaway here is, for e-commerce organizations, uh, it's important to really recognize your consumers' preferences and act on them, getting it right sooner than later, because when you're repeatedly failing meeting customer expectations, there's a propensity across buyers to move on to providers that they do understand their expectations. So what are some of the ways that businesses, the e-commerce organizations, are able to meet but also exceed the customer expectations for personalization? Couple different ways. Again, from left to right, looking following the red bars here. One such way that's common across conversational commerce users is to make sure that those interactions are consistent. Again, the interaction may have started on the web, and then the consumer is picking it up on a mobile device, and they want to continue through text messaging. There's a lot of different channels and methods of contact involved, but consistency is expected by consumers. So that's number one. Number two, consumers also expect brands to know who they are. So I like to know the brand to recognize what items have I been looking at. Arun would like to do the same. Tori would expect the same. So every consumer has a different journey, and it's important for e-commerce brands today to start mapping those journeys, building journey insights, and start personalizing based on the unique journeys that each and every consumer follows. And one important component here that I like to highlight here is, don't be reactive. Reactive meaning when consumers are having questions, when they want to engage with you, that's when you're engaging them. Being proactive is one of the key attributes of leading e-commerce organizations. So what do we mean by being proactive? It means regularly reaching out with relevant updates. Arun, here's your order. Tori, we've fixed the wrong billing issue. Omer, here's the size that was out of stock but now is in stock. So many could be uh, there could be many different examples, but the gist of it here is, start building fruitful relationship with customers by not just reacting, but actually being proactively watching out for their needs. So Arun, I know you shared an example early on with OpenSook, and I think that was an interesting one. I'd love to sort of build on that, maybe with another question to you here to see if you have some ways that you've seen leading brands feel such hyper personalization in their activities.
Certainly. I was just pleasantly surprised to see some of the call-outs that you had, Omar, because they squarely align with what I'm going to talk about. This is another customer of Infobip called Pet Go, again, an e-commerce pet supplies company in Taiwan. Uh, the key things, right? First thing, I'll get to what you talked last, which is being proactive as opposed to reactive, right? So, what they started doing is, hey, I want to grow the business, but my marketing spend, you made the comment about ROMI, which I kind of abstract to ROAS here, right? Advertising spend. So, they have a very high ROMI and ROAS, but they were not really growing the top line. So, how do we change the game for them? That was the problem at hand. So we prescribed the leveraging a centralized data source, a CDP, and bringing together all the data, the different silos that we talked about, and proactively, as you can see at the bottommost point in the solution, right? How do we send certain promotional messages that's going to resonate with them based on their particular point in journey? And how do we send more informed educational messages? This being, a pet, there is a pet owner, so you're sending it to the pet owner so that they can better take care of the pet by purchasing the most relevant things, things of that nature, being proactive. Second is the consistency of communication that you talked about, Omer, right? Leveraging both email and SMS. They had largely used email, which wasn't that effective, so now moving to conversational channels like SMS, right? So that you can better engage and they have an opportunity to go back and forth, kind of take some consulting or advisory service, if you will, from Go, and progress along their journey. That is another element. And third is, how do we send resonating messages, right? Tailored communications. Now that they had CDP in place, they were able to continuously enrich what are the various interactions with that pet owner, and what are some of the states that the pet is going through, right, as it evolves in its lifetime, if you will, and thereby customizing and tailoring their communications so that A, they become a satisfied pet owner and customer, and B, they're also trying to upsell, cross sell, and grow their top line growth. And as you can see, the purchase frequency doubled, net result. And as well as now they could spend less on Facebook like media and have these more conversational, resonant engagement. So they saved about 10% in terms of their advertising spend as well. So, with that said, I think this is a great case that aligned with what you were talking about, Omar. I'll turn it back to you.
No, thank you, Arun, for those. And those are some significant numbers that corroborate the power of personalized engagement. So, we talked about a couple different building blocks so far. The first one, again, as a look back, was knowing who your customers are, a connected view of data, then personalizing. Thirdly, here is continuous optimization with the help of analytics. So, one of the other characteristics of conversational commerce users is continuously using root cause analysis to determine what are factors that drive desired CX, desired experiences, desired marketing results? So you can repeat what's working and start improving and adjusting what's not working. Another key building block here is using data from self-service. We talked about propensity to prefer self-service versus assisted service for commerce interactions. Again, if there's a chatbot or IVA interaction involved, it's important for brands to start analyzing that data to figure out what are some issues, what are some common e-commerce issues that could be addressed more widely and effectively through IVAs and chatbots if and when consumers prefer them. So another thing that conversational commerce users are more likely to do, in addition to encouraging and enabling customers to share their positive experiences to amplify the brand itself. So really, if you're delighting your customers, why not ask them to share their experiences? Now, along the way, we talked about different technology enablers. We talked about channels of engagement like messaging, like third-party messaging apps and text messaging. We touched on different platforms. So it's important to highlight that conversational commerce users are also more likely to incorporate additional supporting technologies in their toolbox. So what are those technologies? Those are highlighted in the second column, where the third column illustrates the adoption by non-users of conversational commerce. So overall, we're seeing a higher level of adoption, hence correlation with use of conversational commerce with analytics. customer analytics, order management, ticketing, in addition to more emerging technologies like automation, AI, predictive analytics, and text analytics. So takeaway from here is you may not need every single one of those tools right away, but there's definitely a high degree of connection, a correlation between using these tools and feeling a top-notch conversational commerce program. So with that, before we initiate our Q&A, I do want to hand it to Tori and Arun for some additional commentary, and we'll start answering some of the questions that we have started receiving from our audience members. Tori, on to
Great.
you.
Thanks so much. Yeah, thanks so much, Omer. Just quickly, Adobe Commerce is really here to help make commerce personal. As one of the key elements in Adobe's digital experience cloud and our portfolio for mid-market and enterprises, we're really here to help empower companies to personalize across all shopping and buying journeys with real-time intelligent insights across all of those touch points. And we do this for B2B, B2C, D2C, all within one single platform. So no need for multiple commerce applications to leverage if you're selling to multiple audiences, or even if you're selling into multiple geographies or other sort of multi-faceted experiences. Really excited to have been here today and happy to turn it over to Arun to speak as well.
Thanks, Tori. Now, needless to say, just based on what Tori said, right, how they cater to B2B, B2C, D2C, that's one of the reasons we are so excited to partner with Adobe. Now, since we are not as widely known as Adobe, so let me take a few extra moments than Tori to talk about who Infobip is. Essentially, we started off, our roots go back to omnichannel communications platform as a service. We are the worldwide leader. And as you can notice, we pretty much serve the entire globe. Our services are offered in 200 plus countries. The key thing that I want to call out for our audience benefit is why we are in the position of being a leader worldwide is the topmost right bottom corner where we say essentially we have direct connections to mobile network operators and OTT platforms as we speak about 750 plus direct connections, which means for a brand you have the wide reach and second quality communications in terms of messages being received by your end customers on their handset or whatever device of choice, so that you can, and also the related insights that you can gather in terms of what they do with those messages. So which means you can have a more effective conversational commerce or conversational customer engagement as a brand with your customers. So that's the takeaway. And moving on a little bit to our offering portfolio, how do we enable this conversational customer experience? Let's call it, as I would always like to say, we could be the single throat to choke for you as a brand. As you can see, the moments, conversations, and answers, those are our internal product names. Those are the SaaS solutions which enable you as a brand running an e-commerce store to engage with your customers, for instance, all the way from enabling discovery, awareness building, which is all through moments, through seamless customer engagement journeys that you could build and leverage our omnichannel CPaaS underneath. And then our conversations as a contact center in the cloud through which you can effectively engage through these digital channels and hand off to a live agent as well as required. And finally, answers is, Omar talked about how we can automate certain elements through chatbots. Answers is a no-code chatbot build platform with which you can build IVAs, virtual assistants, as well as simple bots that you could leverage for automating self-service elements. And that's how we bring together everything using our people module, which is a lightweight CDP that can coexist with Adobe CDPs of the world. And we could deliver a seamless omnichannel conversational customer experience. So that's in a nutshell who we are. And we look forward to serving all of you Adobe Commerce customers out there. Omar, I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Well, thanks both Tori and Arun. This was a great conversation throughout. Now, we have just about enough time for a couple of questions that came from our audience. Before that, however, just want to do a quick look back on what we learned. So we've gone through a lot of research. So the brief summary, and we looked at this slide early on, so quick summary. We'll learn together that customer messaging today has now become an essential ingredient of e-commerce programs where two-thirds of businesses are already using conversational commerce. We define conversational commerce as use of text messaging and third-party messaging apps used in e-commerce programs for various purposes. And then we touched on how it helps lower costs, grow revenue, improve profitability, but most importantly, create happier customers. Then we touched on a couple building blocks. We talked about connecting data about customers to know who your customers are, personalizing, and ultimately continuously optimizing with the help of analytics and AI. So with that, David, who's our moderator, David, I'd like to turn it over to you to help us start answering some of the questions from our audience. And again, Arun and Tori, pleasure to chat with you today. So, David, back to you.
Thank you, Omer. We'll start with you, Arun, with this first question. Messaging in our business involves various functions: commerce, marketing, sales, and service. Do you have any tips on how to align all of them around the same goals?
Sure, David. Thanks for the question, whoever posted from the audience. So I think it goes back to some of the elements we talked a little earlier in the presentation, right? So what I call as the functional silos. Number one is how do we think about cross-pollinating the data, right, from across these functions, from the perspective of the end customer, right? So the customer-centered, conversation-centered, as I alluded to in my earlier comment, and bring together those data, taking the omnichannel perspective, right? So that's one way to think about it. And now, granted, yes, we now accounted for functional silos and omnichannel perspective, but how do we think about it from a channel preference standpoint that we all talked about, right? What is going to be the most resonant channel of engagement with a particular end customer, Tori or Omar? Now, mind that we also should account for the fact that the most resonant channel could change from one to another during the journey, right? For instance, in a marketing context, it's very well might be the case email is the most resonant channel for Tori because she looks at the emails at her leisure so that she has more time to think about, oh, this is the product that really resonates with me. Whereas in the process of the conversion stage, if you will, where she wants to acquire that product, it might be very well be the case that WhatsApp or SMS might be the most dominant channel because she want to have the conversational thing. She has questions back and forth that she want to engage and then pick the right product or reassure herself that that is the product so that she wants to acquire. So the bottom line here being when you think about bringing together data across functions, also think about what stage in the journey the end customer is and what is going to be the most resonant channel of engagement. So that's how we should think about as a brand. So with that said, probably Tori, you might have additional comments to offer.
I think you covered it really well, Arun. The only thing I would just tack on is I want to emphasize your point about looking at it from the customer lens. I think it's critical when you're trying to align multiple internal functions and potentially sometimes competing objectives. Taking that customer centric view is going to be critical. And leveraging, testing to make sure that those decisions that are being made about what you think the customer needs or wants are validated with data throughout the process. I think those two things are going to be critical to creating that unification.
I'll just quickly also add, and again, Arun and Tori, great perspectives. One thing we also hear quite often from our end users is challenges around uh, unshared or siloed KPIs. So each department having their own KPIs. So both you, Tori, and Arun, you mentioned the customer-centric view. I think it's critical to make sure that customer satisfaction or other CX metrics are absolutely used to track the departmental KPIs because those are essentially the common levers that each department can get around to pulling and try and make sure that they work towards the same objectives.
Yeah. Cannot agree more, Omar.
Great.
All right,
David,
we
any other
have the
questions?
next question. Yes, I'll direct this one to Tori. We're not sure how our consumers are using messaging. Do you have any tips on how we can gauge best ways to use conventional commerce in alignment with our buyers' preferences?
I think Arun covered a lot of this earlier, and I'll definitely turn it to him to add some additional context and color. I think for our customers, they often start with very basic transactional messaging, and they track it very closely to see. Is it being used? Are there interactions happening? And then they sort of start to then allow that effort to grow legs across different interactions. I also think there's a lot of best practices and examples out there, especially that the Infobib team can provide as well. So, Arun, I would love to turn it over to you. I know you guys have a tremendous amount of experience in sort of where to start and how to get going.
Yeah, thanks, Dory. Yeah, I think we covered certainly quite a bit of elements during the conversation. Few additional things that I want to call out is number one, the crawl, walk, run approach, right, for lack of a better word. So start off with, yeah, the crawl is, we're all familiar with email. Great. We know how far it can get us. Now let's go to the walk stage, which is where the channels that we talked about today, right? How do we leverage SMS and third party chat apps? While thinking about it now, it's not, I mentioned about this, we are still thinking largely, a lot of the brands think about messaging from the context of the front end of customer engagement journey, if I may paraphrase that way, which is now how do I build awareness and then convert? What happens post conversion? That's equally important, if not more important, right? How do you really best serve the customer? Really identify their service needs before they actually voice their concerns to you or their needs to you. That goes back to what Omar has been talking about, and Tori and I have been highlighting, which is bump up the CSAT, the total customer experience, all those jargons that we threw during the conversation, right? The moment you address that in the post conversion, so you can think about it two ways: self serve, serve through an agent, right? The customer service element. So, how do we effectively leverage the various channels in allowing the customer to self serve himself or herself, right? In the form of a chatbot or IVR or whatever. That is one element. The second is, there are points in time when any of us would feel the need to go interact with a live agent because automation self-serve only takes us so far, right? Based on the scenario at hand. So how do we again give a contact center agent the omni-channel capability, as well as the visualization of the conversational history over time across any and all channels that Arun has engaged with a brand, so that they have it in front of them as a unified dashboard, so that when Arun as a customer doesn't have to repeat himself, right? So think about everything in the context of messaging. Messaging doesn't mean you sending something, positioning, having them buy something. It is about offering the total end-to-end customer experience, then creating the pull effect, because people will naturally connect with your brand and buy. You don't have to ask them to buy anything. There is no more selling. It's just servicing their need, right? So I'll pause there. Omar, you might have some additional inputs to offer.
I think it's critical to really analyze customer behavioral preferences across, generations, across regions. So I know we touched on different examples on that, and we heard both from you, Arun and Tori. So uh, I just emphasize again, know who your customers are, track their behavioral preferences, and capture the voice of the customer as a way to gauge their preferences. But it seems like we're also running short on time, and I see another question that came in. So, David, I'll let you sort of direct it to the right parties, and then we'll start, closing it out for our audience members.
Okay, so for Arun, uh, if an Adobe Commerce client or user are interested in reaching out to Infobit to have conversational commerce joint value deployed, how can they go about it?
Thanks for the question, David. It's simple, as you can see on the slide, right? If you're an Adobe Commerce customer, or you plan to adopt Adobe Commerce and you want to progress on this conversational commerce journey, please shoot an email to adobe_partner_sales@infobip.com. Now, just to reassure you, the people in that alias are not salespeople, including me. I'm part of the alias. So feel free. We are here to help you. It's not to sell, and we'll make sure we can deliver the value between Adobe and us for you.
No, it was a pleasure to host our audience members today, and our most sincere thanks to both Arun and Tori for joining the conversation. A pleasure to chat with you both, and we hope to catch you in our next event.
Thank you, Omer. I want to thank our speakers for sharing their research, insights, and recommendations with us. Special thanks to Infobip and Adobe for making this webinar possible. Use the contact information on the slide to get more information. We hope you enjoyed this session. Thank you for attending.